Gen 4 Pokemon games have many weird features, and one of these oddities was only discovered a few years back when the Diamond and Pearl source code leaked. Map found that playing on certain dates makes you more or less likely to get random Pokemon encounters. The wild part of this was that some of the dates programmed into the games were probably not what you would expect. Along with some fairly normal dates like New Year's Eve and Junichi Masuda's birthday, there are some slightly surprising ones like Abraham Lincoln's birthday and also the end date of World War II. By far, the most surprising dates were the anniversaries of 9/11, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki. It's worth noting that 9/11 only modifies your encounter rate in Japanese Diamond and Pearl, and all three of these dates are removed from Pokemon Platinum. You know, when I randomly made a video about the Battle Hall last year, I didn't really think it would lead to me talking about Abraham Lincoln and 9/11 in a Pokemon video, but here we are. Anyways, when this was initially brought to light, it was described as a modifier of 5 or 10%. So Abraham Lincoln's birthday would increase your encounter rate by 5%, and playing on 9/11 would decrease your encounter rate by 10%. But what does 10% even mean? Does it mean that my encounter rate goes up by a flat 10%? Or is it like my encounter rate is multiplied by 1.1? The answer is neither. People later realized that 10% really means 3%, but sometimes it means 1% and other times it means 0.15%. I'll explain why that is later, but this clarification didn't spread as far as 9/11 reduces your encounter rate by 10%, so there's still a lot of misinformation about how this mechanic actually works. Additionally, the way these games determine your encounter rate is also fairly undocumented and hard to find outside of Discord servers. So, in today's video, I will break down exactly how these Sinnoh games determine your encounter rate, how these special dates impact your gameplay, and ways you can take advantage of this knowledge. I'll also talk a bit about why these dates were likely put into the game. Do note that Heart Gold and Soul Silver are slightly different with how they generate encounters, and as a result do not have any date-based modifiers. I'll be sure to document how Heart Gold and Soul Silver work in the future, but there are a lot of similarities. Alright, let's dive into it. How does the game decide if you should get an encounter or not? Simply put, the game calculates two distinct encounter rates, and you must pass both of these checks to actually get an encounter. Let's say your first encounter rate is 30% and your second rate is 40%. This means your true encounter rate is 12%. So how does the game calculate these? Let's start with the first encounter rate. Generally, grass tiles have a base encounter rate of 30% and cave tiles have a rate of 10%. These can change based on your location. Notable exceptions to this in Pokemon Platinum include the Trophy Garden, Snow Point Temple, and the Great Marsh. Next, the game applies some modifiers to this base encounter rate. Infamously, the first one the game tries to apply is a fishing modifier that doubles your base rate if your lead Pokemon has the ability Sticky Hold or Suction Cups. Thanks to a typo, these abilities have no impact on the rate of fishing encounters after all. Game Freak did fix this in Heart Gold Soul Silver, but of course the bug persists in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. After this minor fail, the game then applies other ability-based modifiers. If your lead Pokemon has No Guard, Arena Trap, or Illuminate, your base encounter rate is doubled. On the other hand, White Smoke, Quick Feet, and Stench half your encounter rate. If you're in a Sandstorm, which in Sinnoh only happens on Route 228, and your lead Pokemon has the Sand Veil ability, your rate is also halved. Same goes for a Snow Cloak if you're in a snowy map like Route 217. Now it's time to talk about two items that nobody ever thinks about, the white and black flutes. Using the white flute will multiply your base encounter rate by 1.5, while the black flute will half your encounter rate. The flute effect lasts until you leave the area you're in, so if you don't plan on moving much, this can be really useful. The funny thing with these flutes is that you can't actually get them within Diamond and Pearl, but they are fully functional. The only way to acquire them normally is via Pal Park or trading. In Platinum, you can get them from Looker and an NPC at Hotel Grand Lake. The final modifier is based on your lead Pokemon's held item. If it is holding a Pure Incense or a Cleanse tag, your encounter rate is multiplied by 2/3. Once all the modifiers are applied, this first rate is finalized. Simple enough, but if you missed any of that, I put it all up on my website. The math geniuses among us may have already pieced together that it is actually possible to get this number down to 0 and nullify encounters without a repel. But only in one specific location, Snow Point Temple. Since it has the lowest non-zero encounter rate at 5, a combination of Quick Feet, Black Flute, and a Cleanse tag would get it all the way down to 0. Apologies for filling your head with useless Gen 4 trivia. Alright, we've learned about the first encounter rate, but where does Abraham Lincoln's birthday come into play? The second encounter rate, of course. But before the game calculates that, it does one more situational random number check. This is one of those mechanics that is never really talked about online, but speedrunners know all too well. When you enter an area, the game counts the combined steps and turns you take on tiles that can generate encounters. During these first 8 steps and turns, you have a substantially lower chance of getting a random encounter. Essentially, you have a 5% chance to even calculate your encounter rate on these specific tiles. 95% of the time, you just get no encounter. So going back to the example from earlier, if your first encounter rate is 30% and your second rate is 40%, and you are on one of these first 8 tiles, your encounter rate on that tile goes all the way down to 0.6%. Once enough steps or turns are taken, this check is completely skipped. It's just a factor when you initially load into an area. Notably, this counter is reset at every map transition. Now let's break down the second encounter rate. First, this rate is always set to a base value of 40. If you're running through long grass or riding your bicycle, this encounter rate increases by 30. After these potential modifiers are checked, we get to the final modifier, the main point of this video, the special dates. At this point, the game will check your current system date and apply the appropriate modifier. Here are some of the key dates for Pokemon Platinum. I'll note the rest on my website, but you probably only care about the dates that maximize or minimize your encounters. Going back to our original question, this is what +10 or -5 means. It is a modifier on the second encounter rate, but not to the overall encounter rate. So for example, in Diamond and Pearl, Abraham Lincoln's birthday modifies this rate by +5. Going back to the original example where everything else is standard, that means instead of a 12% encounter rate, your encounter rate is 30% times 40 plus 5%, which equals 13.5%. So yes, under normal circumstances, +5 does not mean +5%, it means plus 1.5%. Math. Let's take a look at the low encounter rate tiles that I mentioned earlier. If we are on a +5 date, we go from a 0.6% chance to 0.675%. Hopefully you can see now why I had to explain everything else. All in order to make sense of how these special dates actually impact the overall encounter rate. Do note that this special date mechanic also falls under time travel protections. I explained this in more detail in both my Honey Tree and time travel videos, but the TLDR is that you can't just change your console date to one of these special dates and expect results. You would either need to use a loophole like I described in my video, or change the date to the day before, save in game, and then wait approximately 24 hours. Alright, congratulations, you now understand how encounter rates work in these Sinnoh games. But why on earth does this date mechanic exist? Why did they program such bizarre dates into these games and tell nobody about them? I talk about this in another video where I covered a similar date mechanic related to egg hatching, but it's crazy to me that it took a source code leak to finally learn about these hidden mechanics. On that egg hatching video, user Ezra Bradford left a great comment pointing out that by having specific dates where eggs hatch faster, you're slightly more likely to have Pokemon with memorable hatch dates. This led me to realize that this was probably the same logic behind the dates that modify the random encounter rate. By having a -10 modifier on dates like 9/11, you're silently reducing the amount of Pokemon people run into and inevitably catch, ultimately leading to less instances of people randomly checking their Pokemon summaries and being reminded of something bad that happened. The inverse would be true for dates like Masuda's birthday and I guess Abraham Lincoln's birthday, just making it more likely to have Pokemon with memorable-ish dates. Ultimately, I don't think this had a noticeable impact given it took leaked code for us to find out. People probably weren't looking up the significance of the date they caught their Pokemon on often enough to realize it was a fun Easter egg. I'm also not sure why dates like New Year's or the March equinox have a -10 modifier, or why Christmas would have a -5 modifier. Maybe for these dates, it's just to give you a more pleasant playing experience on the holidays. If you have any ideas, definitely let me know in the comments. While these date modifiers end up being fairly small, they definitely have an impact on your overall encounter count. Going back to our original example, the -10 dates brought our encounter rate down 3%. Not a huge change, but it adds up fast if you're running through hundreds of grass tiles. If you're doing a full odd shiny hunt, or really anything that requires a lot of encounters, I definitely recommend doing so on one of the +10 dates, along with using the White Flute, riding your bike, and using an ability like No Guard. These factors combined can increase your standard grass encounter rate from 12% all the way to 72%. This is a massive change that can significantly speed things up and make your life easier. Now that I've thoroughly explained all this and you can figure out encounter rates on your own, let me know in the comments if you'll use any of this for any of your playthroughs or hunts. I'm always interested in seeing how useful or useless the stuff I research is, so let me know. Hopefully this clears up things, and again, I'll have a written explanation of everything along with the special dates documented on my website. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it. I've also been streaming a ton of Pokemon Platinum speedruns on Twitch lately, so definitely drop me a follow there if you want even more Pokemon content. Links in the description as always. Thank you to all of my Patreon supporters, and special shoutouts to Frorio, Mythro Was Taken, Verota, and Fuzzy Hugs for your support. That's going to be it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.